Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. This is the first chapter that we're going to do for Kubernetes and Enterprise Guide 3rd edition. You might have found the labs from the 2nd edition. This is the whole new slew of labs. So they're going to rhyme. They're going to look very similar, but we're starting over from the very beginning. So my name is Mark Borstein. I'm the CTO of Tremo Security and co-author of the book. And the illustrious Scott Surovich has also joined me. Scott, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm first of all, I apologize for my voice. I'm getting over a flu, so I've been coughing a lot. So apologies for that. I'm Scott Surovich. I am the principal engineer for Kubernetes and containers. And I'm going to say at a global tier 1 bank, and of course, co-author of the book.
Yeah. And you know, how long have you been working on Kubernetes here, Scott?
I lose track of time, right? That's just a big blur. Got to be year 7.
7
in production.
Wow.
6 and 7 in production.
Yeah, because we've been working together 2017. I think
Has it been that long?
Talking.
That painful? Yeah, probably.
Really has. Really has.
Time flies, it really does.
So everybody that's joining us, and of course this will be available after the stream as well. The goal is that we are going to live stream all of our labs. So over the course of the next how many ever weeks it is, there are 19 chapters. Each chapter will not be a single stream. I'm guessing we're probably going to do, so like this chapter, if we get a half hour out of it, I'll be really happy. So this one will be pretty quick, and we'll talk a little bit about the book. And then, but like as we get into a lot more of the advanced topics, and there are a lot of advanced topics in this book. Like it's really crazy once you take a step back and you look at all the stuff we put in this book. I mean, Kubernetes, obviously, Docker, obviously, but authentication, RBAC, we integrate AD, open search. What's the one that we're doing for AppArmor? Is it AppArmor? Is that I always get?
Yeah. It's KubeArmor, which can creates the LSM policies. Yes.
Yep. Prometheus, Grafana, Argo, GitLab. So you're going to work with a lot of different stuff throughout this book, and how I think at least have a lot of fun. I know I had a lot of fun writing it. Scott, what was your favorite part about writing this book?
Wow, finishing it. Quite outside of that, we tackled some topics that, honestly, I'm gonna be honest to everybody listening or the readers, that we thought would be pretty easy sometimes to describe and make labs for. We ran into headaches, mostly because of using certain kind versions and how things work. But we learned a lot from it. On paper, everything works easy, and when you start to integrate it. But I liked all the topics that we've added, and they've been well received. Right, Mark, breaking things out, adding runtime security, all the changes you just mentioned, of course, too. I always like the reviewers, right? We get some great feedback from the people that are looking at the chapters, from yourself as well, right? Because of course we look at each other's work, working closely. It's always fun. Obviously, we couldn't do 3 editions if we didn't at least enjoy working on this together, because I think we kill each other by now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely.
I mean, how about yourself, though? I got to ask you that.
Yeah, my favorite. I mean, it would be a little too on the nose for me to say the authentication chapter. Anybody who's not familiar with me, I am a identity management specialist. I come from the identity world. I do not come originally to the DevOps world, or from the DevOps world. I came from identity and security. And our product and project is a authentication system primarily. So, but saying authentication would be a little too on the nose, I think. I actually want to say, I think the Prometheus chapter was the most fun to write. It was the first time that I working with it was the first time I ever worked with OpenSearch. And being able to get that all working and automated, like, you just run a script and, oh boy, here's all here. And like, it's, back in my day, we had a Vagrant VM and that's the only way we could do any of this development stuff. And that's how we liked it, damn it. It's absolutely amazing what you can pull off. So I want to say that particular chapter was really a lot of fun to put together, especially because it was also, I think, one of the brand new chapters.
Yep.
If you worked with the third edition, or I guess the third edition, the second edition, we added from the second and first edition, we had vCluster, virtual clusters. We added secrets. That was a big one. We added Prometheus and OpenSearch. We added KubeArmor. And then we also added in Pulumi as a infrastructure as code at the end. So there was a lot of new stuff in this book. I think when we first started talking about it, it was like, all right, this is going to be a tech refresh. Like, this is going to be simple. We're going to keep it easy. And then like 300 additional pages later.
Not to mention what hit the cutting floor as well, that we were like,
oh
we
yeah,
this and this and this, until it got to be 600 and some odd pages and said,
yeah. We talked about wanting to do storage, and it's just like, no, I got nothing left in the tank. Maybe for the fourth edition in a few years.
Yeah, a little break.
Yeah. The other big thing in the third edition. So if you did read the second or first edition, in addition to all the additional content, one of the things that we also did was we removed the scripts from the book. So they're in the Git repo, but to make it a little easier to keep it up to date so that the book has a little more longevity, we decided we talk about the scripts, and we're going to go through that a little bit today with Docker. And hey, Sevi! So from Kubernetes Virtual Book Club, where we've been hanging out now for like 8 weeks. I think it's been like 2 months.
I think it's been longer.
So yeah. So and we ain't done yet. That train's still rolling. But no, great to see you, Sevi.
Yeah, definitely.
So we're hoping this book has a little bit longer. Yeah, this stuff moves so fast. Like there've already been changes I've had to make to some of these scripts to keep them going. So and if you're watching, please put comments in, say hello, let us know, that you love the book. If you really don't like the book, yeah, I'm just not going to share that comment, but
we're always open to criticism.
So
too. Yeah.
We're here to have fun. Like that's the first rule. We're going to have some fun. All right. So we have been talking enough. Why don't we dive into it? So the first chapter is Docker. Fun fact. The original wasn't the original first edition going to be the complete guide to Docker, or the complete guide to Docker?
It started off with a request from the publisher about more Docker, right? I think, and then we approached him more with the enterprise Kubernetes idea. And the first edition does have 3 chapters on Docker.
We had 3 chapters on Docker in the first edition?
Yeah, it was really Docker, storage, and networking.
Oh,
so
that's right.
We went through all of those. Never enough detail for all of them, right? Those are a lot to write. But it was there just to get us started. Oh, we got T-Share as well.
Yeah, we're getting the whole virtual book club gang back together.
That's awesome. It was good to do, but it took away chapters, right, from Kubernetes and the whole idea of what to do in the enterprise. So that's where we, second edition, decided to streamline that and drop it down.
That's right. Because when we first published, so the first edition was what, 2019?
Yeah, somewhere around
2020,
there.
I think. I feel like that was when Docker finally gave up on trying to compete with Kubernetes. Sevi, just like, you're awesome. But I feel like when we were writing the book was like when Docker had finally given up on trying to compete with Kubernetes. I was like, okay, we can't beat them, so let's join them. And just like, there was this idea from Packet that, we would have a Docker book. And I think you and I were just like, no, you don't want to do this, guys. Really? You don't. So yeah,
they wanted that to be 350 pages. We had it like 600, and yeah, they actually asked us to cut it down originally, and we said no, really. I mean, if you took any content out, it really took away. So almost essentially, we worked for free past those pages. But
yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, it does fuel my Kona coffee habit. So I've got this on. I've got the PDF open off camera. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got a VM up and running. Scott, how do you want to do this? Do you want to start with the install? Do you want to talk a little bit about Docker? Where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, let's go to the install first. I go to the script. So I want to kind of go into what you were talking about. and again, apologies to everybody. Next video, my voice better be normal, and I won't cough in anybody's ear. So as Mark mentioned, we moved some of the code out of the book. The book has some code here and there, right, when it really makes sense to call it out. But we wanted the extra space, to be honest, to add chapters and to simply increase other technical content. So we often in the book will still mention quickly what the scripts do. But most of the scripts, and I'm not going to say they're all as detailed as this, but so if we go into chapter 1, we've only got one script in here, right? So yeah, the way that's formatted because the screen is kind of
I'll make it a little bit smaller. There we go.
Yeah, not too bad. Still scrolling a color, still wrapping, but so you can see right in here, this all outputs obviously when you run it as well. And we're installing this, we're doing this, right? Not everything. Install JQ, not a lot to say there, right? We just say, okay, here. But if you're scrolling down a bit on this, Mark II, so we're just calling out
this. This might be a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's probably good as long as everybody can see it. I can see that.
Yeah.
I'm assuming most probably can. Cool, that looks much better. Thanks, Mark. So each section we're describing what the commands are going to do. So like I said, installing JQ, pretty straightforward, right? The next section is kind of unique where I wanted to do with the update for passwordless sudo. This way, at least for the rest of the book, when we're done sudo, you don't have to enter something. So that's what that line's just telling you. So if you know Linux, you've probably seen things like this. We're installing Vim. Then it gets to the next part. And this was an interesting one. If everybody's looking at that one set line, Ubuntu 2204, I think, did this, and so does 24. By default, when you do a system control, like a restart on something, you're going to get interactively prompted for what you want to restart. And we didn't want to do that to the readers. So what we do is, you can just see in this line, we're changing it to A for automatic. I think the default is I. So this way, when you do a system restart on something, on a daemon, it's not going to prompt you. Now, anybody that's maybe watching this is saying, well, wait a minute, I don't need to do that anymore. Well, it depends what version you're running. I just verified like 24. So 2404.0, this is needed. 2404.1, it defaults to automatic. It's also commented out in that file. So the default is back to just being the automatic one. So no harm or foul if we do this. Either one it works on. But just wanted to call that out because it is pretty new to a lot of people. Then it really gets into installing, right? So to install, we're going to do an apt update, get some of the certificates and utilities, so we can look at the keys to get Docker. The one sudo line there, you'll see it says install-m, blah, blah. It's creating that directory and setting up permissions in case you've never used that command before. So it's getting that ready for the next couple lines where we're going to get Docker's keys. Of course, after that, we'll add the repo from this. And most of this, if you're looking at it, is pretty much from Docker's documentation, right? We've just automated it and added some comments and stuff. And then, of course, it'll go and install. And at the bottom there, you'll see it's going to do enable the Docker and to start Docker. And then finally, adding the currently logged in user to the Docker group. This way you can actually use Docker without having to do sudo commands, for example. And then at the end, we're restarting your shell. I think that's the end of the script, right, Mark? The
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing I always find interesting about Docker and Docker installs in the Linux world is I feel like this is one of those things that you don't want to go to the OS repo for, because the OS repo is always woefully out of date. Like, I don't really know why, but I feel like the Ubuntu and Red Hat too had this issue where, like, if you just ran like yum install Docker, you had this like woefully out of date version of Docker that just didn't work with anything.
Yeah, so that's a good key point here, Mark, right? Because first edition, we did have some people going off into weeds and trying different OSs, WSL, under Windows. We actually had a couple manifests like that too, right? We were pulling them right from a Git and applying them. And while they update to a new Kubernetes, we're still using a version that's a little bit old, things are breaking. So you're going to notice throughout the book, a lot of these manifests that you would go and get from maybe a Git somewhere, we're pulling into ours so we can fully control the entire stack, just to make it much easier for people.
And Sevi makes a great comment here about Podman. I love me Podman. I really wish I could use Podman every single day. What I don't think a lot of people realize with Docker is that there is a server-side component, right? Like Docker was originally meant to be orchestrated via APIs the way that we orchestrate Kubernetes, right? And that causes a lot of heartburn everywhere, right? Like if you want to do things without privilege, and we get into this in the later parts of the book, like even if you want to build like a container without having to have from a CI/CD system from within a pod, without having to have access to the Docker daemon, you need something else, which is weird because Docker, you're just building a tarball of tarballs, right? Like that's all a Docker image is at the end of the day. And so, okay, Scott's figured out how to use the how to show comments too.
I don't know how to reply.
Well, that's the point of us talking, right? Like we reply here. So we'll get into this way at the end, but like projects like Podman from Red Hat were an attempt to give you Docker functionality without the Docker daemon, without that process running in the background where it's all client only. I think at least in my own experience, the big issue I've always run in with Podman and similar is for everything except building containers for like running containers. I always run into like weird issues. Like, it works for most stuff, but then there's this like one weird corner case that I need for one weird reason that just it doesn't work for me. And it's not like it's not consistent. Like now I can go file a bug because it's just like, I remember one point I was testing like something that would run GitHub Actions locally, so you didn't have to do the whole check-in and wait dance. And then go doom scrolling on social media while you're waiting for everything to build. You could test it locally. That didn't work with Podman. That would only work with Docker.
When we use Kind, right, Mark? So our first two editions, it didn't support Podman. It was later after the second edition that it was officially supported. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. For a while, it was just pure Docker. I forgot when it changed, but it maybe in the fourth we just test everything. But as Sevi was testing some stuff, who knows? I'd be more concerned some of the containers that we use, that we pull, may not run
Yeah,
because of that,
that's a
but
good point.
we could fix that at a certain point. But just use different images.
All right, so do we want to go ahead and let's just go ahead and install it? I don't
Yeah,
need sudo,
nothing
right? It's
better than
just
a live
install.
demo.
Yeah, it's just install. I don't need sudo. It's going to call sudo at the right time.
Yeah, I don't have to here.
All
What's going
right.
to happen is when you execute this, you will be asked, of course, for your password because it is trying to do a sudo. So the first time it has to do it, it will ask you once more at the end until the shell restarts.
So one thing I will say is, so this VM is running on DigitalOcean. I blew up my own lab before we got started, so I decided just to run this on DigitalOcean. The labs in general are tested on Ubuntu 22.04, and it's assumed to be a VM. So to anybody watching, some of the labs in theory could work, especially once we get into the later chapters where we're really focusing on installing stuff onto Kubernetes, can work with other environments. I know Carlos Santana had gotten some stuff working on like Linux Mint, but we do
And this
all
will
of
be
our
the last
testing on
time you have to type a
2204.
password mark on that. So, now the passwordless sudo is enabled, and yeah, you can see it here. I have run this many times on 24 as well, which you would expect to work, but it does.
Yeah. The other thing I'll note is that if you're in an environment where you already don't have a password, like you don't have sudo password enabled, like I know a lot of the bare metal provisioning for like I use Moz metal as a service in my lab. But like if you did this on like an AWS VM or something, you might not have a password. Just hit the prompt, just hit enter when it asks for the password, and you'll go right through. All right, so I'm on page 13. If you do have the book, oh, that's great to hear. Let me share that. So Alexandros is sharing that he's been, and I will say when I had my issues with Podman, we're talking like 4 years ago. So like, you know, it's a great team. Those people know what they're doing. So I'm glad to hear that they're really plowing away at it. So I'm on page 13, and its test is, let's see, we go ahead and paste this in. And so what's happening here, Scott? It says it's pulling. Like, what does that actually mean?
Well, I'm going to say it just like it sounds, right? So it's downloading the image from, by default, it's going to be in Docker Hub. I'm pretty sure we're pulling this from, right? We didn't add anything. So at this point, it just downloaded the image because you pulled it, right? It's not going to run.
But like, what do we mean by image? Like, we're using the word image, but we should
boy.
probably explain what that is. What
I'm
is
going
a
to go to use
Docker
a
image?
developer because now you're talking about the tarball, pulling it down. I'll throw that to developer for you, Mark.
Okay, so I think one of the things that's so amazing, Docker is not a container. Like Docker is not containerization. Like in the Linux world, there is really no such thing as a container. I think it was Google that really pioneered the concept of containerization, where it's a combination of C groups, and different isolation.
Yeah, so Linux namespaces,
Isolation
along with the C
technologies
groups.
inside of Linux to create, what we call a Linux container. So what Docker did that was amazing was they said, okay, we're going to make it easy to use. Like that was really the important part. And so even though containers, as we would think about, have existed in Linux, all those technologies existed in Linux for a long time, Docker made it easy. And so there were really two concepts to it. The first was the image, which is just a tarball of tarballs. So they pioneered this concept of copy on write. So whenever you add something to an image, you're building a Docker image. What you're doing is you're creating this layer and you're saying all of the stuff that we're adding go into a layer. And so whenever you add something to the image, you're adding a additional layer. So like when we pulled down the Ubuntu layer, all the image, all you saw was one layer, right? That one progress bar. But you pull down something that's built off of Ubuntu, then you're going to see it's going to pull the Ubuntu layer plus whatever your container layer is. And most containers have multiple layers. And so that's what the beauty of it is that it's a tarball of tarballs that are all get shod so they can be identified. So like as an example, when I go to pull let's say I went to go pull the Nginx. No, because I think Nginx is Scratch. Or no, that one's probably Alpine. But let's say I pulled like Open Unison as an example. That's built on Ubuntu. I know that one's built on Ubuntu. But I already have the Ubuntu image downloaded. It doesn't re-download it, right? It will use the existing image. So that cuts down on how much it's pulling in. And so Sevi makes a great comment here about, we were talking before about different providers and whatnot. I like DigitalOcean. They're cheap. They're very quick to spin up for stuff like this. But one of the things is that we specifically wrote the labs so that you can run them in your environment. Like if you have just a regular like a regular modern laptop, you should be able to run these locally inside of a VM. Like that was really what we wanted to make sure you could do. Doesn't always work, especially once we get to the later chapters where there's just more stuff. But for the most part, until you get to like chapter 15, I think everything can be run in a VM that would fit on most modern hardware that'll run a virtualizer. And then we got Alan as well, also our friend from the Virtual Book Club. So when we see the pulling, that's what's happening is it's pulling in that Docker image and into its local cache. And like right now we're inside of a Docker image, right? Like it says I'm root or no ID root.
You can even tell from that pull mark, right? Because you only see the one pull complete. So you're talking about the layers. So you can see there's just the one layer. We do talk about this in chapter or on page 7. We talk about the layers.
Yeah.
Briefly, ever so briefly, but just to describe them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal of this chapter wasn't so much to make you a Docker maven, but just good enough at Docker to be dangerous.
Enough to run kind was one of the main goals, right? So you knew.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And then Alan brings up a good question. What about OCI and the tech related to images? Do you have any thoughts there, Scott?
Well, it depends, Alan, by concept, right? So it's a standard, right? So they're all, this does confuse people, right? When Docker was deprecated in Kubernetes and everybody freaked out a couple years ago. But people kept thinking I couldn't use my Docker container anymore. Well, Docker creates an OCI2 compliant container, right? So the standard is what makes this all possible to use different builds.
Real quick, what is OCI? Like, what does that even mean?
The Open Container Initiative standards. I'm trying to think of a better way to describe that, right, Mark? It's like any kind of standard CIS benchmarks. It's just what you have to follow to make a compliant image that will run with any engine that can run an OCI compliant image. So,
and then it's also, but it's not just Docker, right? Because we can store all sorts of artifacts with OCI, like signatures. You can do Helm charts.
Helm charts. Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's expanded quite a bit from when it first came out, right? It was pretty much the images. But then, yeah, Helm was one of the big ones, right? Because everybody had to have a chart museum. Not everybody had that. Nobody wanted to deploy it. Now you can just do the OCI. So, yeah, just a set of standards that make things, I'm going to say probably too high level, but that makes it work with many different tools and use cases.
Yeah, because like at the end of the book, we deploy Harbor. And the interesting thing about Harbor is it's not necessarily just a Docker registry. I mean, that's where it got started, but it's any kind of OCI, right? Because like you've got experience using it with like to store Helm charts, right?
Yeah. I don't, Helm charts being OCI stored is fine, but not every vendor and their automated installs use the right syntax, I'm going to say, right? They're still hard coded to, Helm install or without the OCI colon. prefix. So I know it's changing a lot, but I ran into it too many times. So yeah, we're using a real kind of like chart museum, I'm going to call it, one that's compatible.
Gotcha.
But it does work with both, right? Because most are starting to do that now. You can do an OCI or you can do a pure Helm.
Yeah, and I think that Alan's question is the set of standards to the layering of tars at a higher level. I actually think that it's at a higher level, like because it's not necessarily it's a way to define artifacts, and those artifacts could be tar balls, right? Like if it's a way to define the container, um, uh, uh, a way to define the container to store artifacts. So if you think of like HTTP as a way to define transport, OCI is a way to define how you represent an artifact. What that artifact is isn't super important. Just like a zip file is a way that you compress an artifact, but what actually goes in, or a set of files, and it describes what a file is, but it actually doesn't care what a file is, right? It's just data. So I think that's where the OCI part comes in, is it says, okay, if you have an OCI compliant registry, you don't have to use Docker's registry. You don't have to use Docker Hub. You can use GitHub. You can use what's the one that Red Hat got from CoreOS?
Oh, it depends who you want to. I've heard different pronunciations.
Quay. Yeah, thank you. So it lets you go between those, and then that's what also allows you to use use these registries for different things. So like when Red Hat was first doing what's it called? Red Hat was first doing the operator, the whole operator store push. And the operator catalog, that's what I'm looking for, the word. You would store your artifacts, your metadata artifacts in an OCI repo, and it would pull it out. So that's where OCI really comes in. But that's a great question, Alan.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the specifications, the standards for the format. The thing is, you can put other things in it, like you're saying, Mark. It's almost like the secret being base 64. A lot of people don't realize. I had this big discussion because I am an author of another book, Anthos in Action, that I wrote with Google. And I wrote the one Kubernetes chapter, and it was a big, I'm not going to get into who was in it, but the inventors of Kubernetes, right? The founders actually looked at that chapter and are kind of annoyed at the whole idea that secrets are just considered for passwords and stuff. They're like, no, it was meant for binary data. Point is, there you are. You got a thing out there that people think is for putting in a password, but you can put binary data in there.
Right.
It's just standard. It's a format, and probably different ways to describe that.
Yeah. And then here, I've never used cloudfanatic.net. So this is not an endorsement, but one of our viewers offered it up. So if you're watching this and you want to be able to run it, go ahead and check them out. That'd be cool. All right. So we have our container. I think we stepped through the CLI and the different things that you can do with the CLI. So I think we've got Docker run here. So like here's the command Docker run Bitnami Nginx latest. With Bitnami's changes, this still going to work?
It should, because I do still use that. Oh, it's been
Docker. Oh, I think I know what.
Oh yeah, kind of need that command, don't you? Okay.
Yep, kind of works that way, right? So like you can see here, it's pulling now. What's different with this Docker run command? Like what? It looks like this is an interactive run.
Yeah, and that's what we get into a little bit in the chapter. We explain that is so we had a pull, right? The pull is going to say pull down the image. We had that for the Ubuntu example. By saying a Docker run, it's going to pull, assuming it's not already in the cache, right? But it's going to run in interactive mode. So as you were saying, Mark, that's why we're seeing this output right in here, right? Standard out coming into here, which could be good for, a quick test or something. But of course, especially in the example of the books, you can't do anything now, right? I mean, you can hit this from another machine, providing you've opened up ports in that, but let's not get into that yet.
Yeah.
But how would you can't curl it from the same machine unless you run another instance, right? You could spawn another shell and do something. Typically, this is not what we're going to do, but we wanted to describe it to the readers that, okay, yeah, if all you do is a Docker run, because of course, what's one of the commands Docker tells you to test? Docker run hello world. So people often go through, cool, I'm always going to do a Docker run Nginx, Docker run Ubuntu. Well, yeah, you could, but you probably want to add another parameter in there, right? So you're kind of stuck here. You'd have to do a control C, right, to get out because you're in a prompt. I mean, if that makes sense.
So now I'm out. And then oops.
You do lowercase. Yep. There you
So I killed it, but the image is still there, right? Like I still have the image downloaded and the process is still registered as having run, even though it's not going anymore.
Yes. This is something to be very careful with, right? People that start playing with a lot of images. You pull them, you run them, they're caching, right? And once you're going to fill up your drive pretty quickly if you don't realize, oh yeah, it's gone now, but it's not really gone. It's always going to sit in the cache. It's really important with Kubernetes, right? Once your file system hits 80%, it's not going to schedule pods anymore on that machine. So that's where garbage collection comes in, right? Or in this case, on a local Docker, you'd have to do some system prunes, images, and that. We used to cover that more in the other chapters when we had the old editions. I think I cover a little bit in here, but we had to condense those down into one chapter.
Right.
So yeah, it's good to have these in here. There are Docker options that you can do to remove images once they're stopped in that, right? There's so many Docker command lines. Right, Mark, if you were to do a Docker and list all the commands, you could show the people watching. There's a page.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, so I mean, there's all sorts of stuff you can do.
Yeah, and then there's of course some of those, but that's just for pure Docker. Now, if you do like a Docker run with some help, now this is where it gets interesting, right? Because I remember Pact, I think, asked us at one time, could you describe the options? And I'm like, yeah, no.
No.
Right. It's going to be it's every chapter. I mean, it would just be huge. I said, no. The one thing I really have always liked about Docker, and I actually had going back about 8 years ago, I had a call with Docker, and still relatively early adoption, right? And they were asking me about what I liked on the help. It was how to make it better. And I did give them that compliment. I said, no, your help is actually incredibly good. You can figure out most of the stuff with help commands. You don't just get basic little things that are like, what does that really mean? So in this case, so if you scroll a little bit, Mark, let's look at the -D, so we want to get to, right? Might be jumping a bit, but I'm going to build on what you were just doing, right? So Mark did the Docker run command for Nginx, and we all saw the interactive come up. Yeah, but we were stuck again. Mark exited, did a Docker PS, you wouldn't see anything, -A says it was running. So more common command is going to be the -D, all right, because you're going to run it in a detached mode. So I might be jumping the gun a bit, Mark, but
nope, you are right where we were. I was just about to run this command when you got into wanting to see.
Cool.
So we've got the Docker to run -D in there.
Yep. So now, as you can see, when Mark runs this, the PS is saying, show me what containers are running. And it is running, right? And it's actually sitting there now. And to prove it's very similar, it's the exact same thing as what we just ran, but in detached mode, you could do a logs on this, right, Mark?
Was it Docker logs?
Yeah, and you can do the name or you can do the container ID, right? Either one.
There we go.
And same output, right? Except now our workstation or our server is not taken over in interactive mode to sit there. So that's the one you'll do more often.
And then next we run into giving it a name, because
oh yeah, good point.
If you don't give it a name, it will always be like, what is the naming convention? Like an adjective underscore famous scientist.
Yeah, there's some interesting ones that when they pop up with names, I'm gonna say honestly, if I had a big crowd, I wouldn't want that name up. There's just some weird ones, right? That I'm like, that's kind of a interesting name. Yeah, so it is a good practice, obviously, to name your containers, especially if you start doing this for development. You've got, I've had 20, 25 containers running when I'm doing stuff just to play around and having to look at either, container ID. You're not going to remember that. Some people on here might, I can't. And the names are just weird, especially if you're scripting things, right? So yeah, Mark's example, you name that one Nginx test. Then when you do your Docker log commands and that, you can use those names instead of the container ID.
And then like these are processes that are running, right? Like these are, if I run a not a Docker PS, but just a PSA, you can actually see these are my Nginx containers running as processes inside of my Linux server. And so there's a way to like connect to these if I need to, right?
Yeah. So you wanna get into that Nginx container, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we were to just do the Docker command real quick again, we'll just show some people that. I mean, like I said, I'm a big fan of the output because if you forget and just kind of scroll up, and of course we're gonna look for something in here, and here goes my cold again. Yeah, we can attach into that running container. So the container's already running, so we want to attach to it, but not just attach, right, Mark? We want to do an option with that. I don't know if we have to show it or you can just describe if you're going to do a dash.
Which one do you want me to do?
Help. Real quick on this, just do a dash help again, just so I'm telling people. That's right, this one won't have that. Sorry, I was thinking about my, if I was doing an exec into it.
Yeah.
Go to the Nginx test one. That's probably a good one.
You want me to do this one?
Yeah, why
First
not?
one? Stupid. Clear. So we're going to do Docker, attach. I think to see anything, I'm going to have to hit the server. And of course, I don't know what the server is off the top of my head. Give me a second.
Oh boy, that's true. I think in the chapter I have some output from one of those, I thought.
Here we go. DigitalOcean. Here's the IP address.
Or if you spawn another shell, you can just do 127.0.0.1, right?
Yeah, let me all right, nope. Here we go. Curl. Oh, yeah. You know what? I know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
Yeah, page 16 of the PDF that I'm looking at has this when we attach, and I say, hey, because you look at it and go, what? Nothing's happening. Well, it is. It's just you got to have some activity.
How do I go to port 8080? Because we didn't do a port forward.
Are we on another shell?
Yeah. What? Don't I need to get the IP?
In theory, if you're on the same machine, you shouldn't have to. If you just did a curl to 127.0.0.1 and then call an 8080.
Well, no, because they're both running on 8080. Aren't they going to be running on DockerNet?
Oh, we're not. We never enabled the ports.
Yeah. So there's going to be an IP address here.
Yeah,
here we go.
Hit the Docker IP. Yeah.
So curl clear. I think what was it?
It's on 8080, right?
There we go.
There you go.
So now we got it from Nginx, and here we go. We got some output from.
Yep. And that's because we're in an attach, right? So that's semi-useful, right? Obviously, I think the command we'd like to show that people might use even more is we got to jump into the container.
Now I just killed it. That Docker attach, when I control C, sends the control C to the process too, right? So it's not
Yeah, if you
working
do a
anymore.
Docker,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
dead.
yes, because you did kill it. And we do on page 17, I think. Yes.
Yeah, we talk
Um,
about this on page 17.
yes, yeah. So you have to do a control P followed by a control Q. So it's very important if you do an attach, especially in a production type environment, that you don't do the control C because you're going to stop it, right?
Or
So
just don't
not,
do Docker
well,
attach.
I got to admit, I rarely do an attach.
Well, I
Um,
mean, can you even do it anymore in a production environment? I mean,
well, let's put it this way: in Kubernetes, no, because there's no Docker.
no, right? Like, so it's probably less of a deal as it once was. And for those that aren't aware, you know, you don't use the Docker daemon anymore in Kubernetes, not since 22,
I think so, yeah.
23. Where it's a daemonless, it's run D. So you're not interacting with the Docker daemon anymore. You're interacting directly with or container D rather. You're interacting directly with
Some other runtime, mostly at this
yeah,
point, right?
OCI, compliant runtime.
Yeah,
Um,
common ones are container D and cryo, obviously, but
yeah.
and there are command lines for those as well.
Um,
What you'll
but yeah,
do
you
more
don't use
often,
the Docker command anymore
no,
in production.
yeah, not often. But if you're doing it for development and like what we're doing here, instead you will use exec for most of your stuff.
We got here.
Nginx test is gone
Docker.
though.
Which one? One of them's still running.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. So
we have
we'll go to
Stupefy.
stupefied Lampert. Stupid Apple.
Gotta love that name.
Docker exec. For the next one, if we stick with, I'll update the. I'll update this so we
I
don't have
agree. I
all
like to
the.
show this with Sevi. I agree. I can probably count on one hand how often I've had to use an attach in all the time I've been playing.
Yeah,
Of
it's
course,
that
exec
one's
is
dangerous.
daily, right?
Yeah.
Exec is something that I'm constantly going into.
So we're in exec. I'm exec in. There is bash. I don't know what is this? Etsy OS release. I'm gonna go with Alpine. Oh, it's just straight up Debian. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So bookworm for all our bookworms. And we did Docker logs. We're coming up on the end of the hour, so I want to make sure
yeah.
we're.
I honestly didn't think we'd go that
We're
long.
right. We're worried this chapter was going to be about 15 minutes.
We don't have nobody can accuse us of not talking. Mark, we
No,
have a
no,
habit of that,
no.
so.
We do love to chat. So like we get into RM and pull and run and that's it. Okay. So like what you mentioned before we have these things going. It's a daemon, so we stop it, but we want to remove it, right? Like that's one of the important things is also clearing it out.
Yeah, if you do let's look at your images first of all too, right, Mark? So Docker images. So we don't see all the processes running, but we can still see here. And which one of these is running right now? Just both of them still?
No, just our
Okay.
stupefied Lamport.
Yep. Yeah, so one thing you might run into a lot is if you were to try to launch, we won't get into it here, right? But you might get a name and use error, right? This happens a lot if you're running an image for multiple testing and you try to run another one and you try to run it as Nginx test and it says, oh, that's in use. You're like, well, no, it's not because it's not running, but it's still there, right? And that's where the Docker RM will come in to say, remove. Sorry, got to mute real quick.
Like, let's run our. Let's see if I can find where we ran Docker run test. Here we go. So this one I think should fail, right? Right. Can't reuse that name because if I could do Docker PS -A, that -A means all, including not just the running ones. We can see here Nginx test we still have. So we want to do a Docker RM
Yes.
Nginx test. And now we can go ahead and launch it. And that's another good reason, I think, for including names is because I know I've done this where if I'm just launching containers for the sake of it, and then I turn around and I look and like, oh my God, I've got like 30 containers running. It helps kind of keep that because you'll be amazed. Like even like I use a Mac, and you'd be amazed how quickly. Now it sets up that it'll only use so many resources, but it's amazing how quickly you can eat up resources with Docker without even realizing it.
Oh, without a doubt, it happens to me more often than I like to admit, just because I get sloppy in my development, especially in my home clusters. Right, next thing you know, I'm like, wow, I've got how many gigs of images? Now what you did here, Mark, is you did an RM, which remove, right? But if you do a Docker images again, just so we can kind of show this. So yeah, you did an RM, but notice we still have an image, right? So we stopped this week and run it, but now as you were saying, maybe we got to clean up because we're running out of drive issues. And I think we cover this at the end of the chapter, but there's adding RMI to the command.
Hold on.
So we can say
stop it.
Is it? Oh yeah, that's right. It was still running. That's right. Yep.
And you want to do Docker RM-I?
Just RMI. Remove image.
Oh, RMI.
No dash, just RMI.
Is
it not there?
Nope, that's not right. No, it's Bitnami / Nginx, because I was trying to do the. I was doing it based on the name of the container, not the image.
Yep.
Remember, a container is the thing. The image, or the container is what's running. The image is the thing. It's the tarballs.
Yep. Always good to have that kind of mistake in
Bitnami Nginx. No, didn't like that.
Oh, it's because it's got a reference.
Oh, because we have,
So you could force it on there.
Docker.
And it's important to note here that you'll notice Mark didn't have to put a colon latest because it assumes that if you don't put one. But if he had like V1, V2, V3, he would need to add that.
All right, let's try this. Clear. Docker.
Yeah, so reference. Yeah, I was going to say what's going on in it.
Or no, Docker RMI.
This might be a good point, Mark, if you wanted to explain the layer sharing.
Well, yeah. So like we were talking about that. That's a good point that we were talking about that a little before, where each image is a tarball of tarballs. So it's a tar of all your files that has a SHA. So if your image says I have layer 1 is SHA 1, 2, 3, layer 2 is SHA 3, 4, 5, and layer 4 is SHA 5, 6, 7, and you already have one of those layers, it doesn't pull it down, right? Because that's what SHA gives you. It's a checksum. So if you have two tarballs with the same checksum, they're the exact same thing. There's no point in repulling it. But that means you don't want to accidentally delete it either. Because if you have something running that's referencing it, now you're going to kill whatever's running. So
yeah, you know what, Mark? I think what's happening here is because you had some of those images that weren't running anymore, but they were in the history.
Yeah.
Removed them. Yeah.
So here's my favorite.
Yeah,
Docker
there's 508.
prune.
Yeah.
Oh, did they get rid of Docker prune?
It's Docker system. And then you can look at the options for it, but I usually do a -A with that. But yeah, I
so that's everything. So I just nuked everything. So now I have nothing, or almost nothing.
Well, that one was running, right? So
yeah,
prune's only going to get resources that are no longer in use.
Right. So, and then, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say the last thing we kind of cover here before we start to wrap it up is Docker build and Docker build X. So one of the things that I find amazing about Docker is you can, depending on the environment you have set up, you can build a ARM image on an x86 system. That's kind of cool to me. Like, you don't have to have an ARM based system to build an ARM image. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, we talk about being in the chapter with architecture and how that can be a problem.
And especially if you're using Docker on Mac that's running on ARM. Although I imagine this is a bigger issue now with Windows because Microsoft's really pushing those Snapdragon ARM-based laptops.
Yep.
There's definitely more ARM out there in the consumer world. And if you're not careful, you're going to pull down an ARM-based version or an AMD when you don't want to. So we dive into here, like if we want to build, if I want to pull the AMD version of a specific image, you can specify the platform, or like I'm going to go with ARM, even though it won't run. So like if I'm running on a Raspberry Pi, I can pull down the ARM-based version, right? Or if I want to push it into a repo, that'll get access to it. And then you've got the build X command, which is what allows you. So this is an example. The build X command, which is, if it's supported, allows you to build on different platforms. So like as an example here, if I'm doing a build for the Kubernetes operator on my Mac and I want to build the container, make sure to include your platform to say AMD 64. Otherwise, you'll end up building an ARM container.
Or attempt to.
We got one more question here.
I was going to say I was going to post it up here.
Yeah. Chapter 15, we get into Istio? 15 or 16?
Yeah, we bounced those up a couple from the second edition. So yeah, there's 2 chapters on it, like Mark was saying. One that gets into installing it and overall of like the different resources that when you deploy it. So going into virtual services, authorization, request authorization down the line. We explain gateways, using Istio Ingress Gateway. We go into Kiali and a lot of visibility. And then we get into a pretty great chapter on deploying an application with even some authentication using JOT tokens that Mark created. Great chapter on that. So I think in the 2 chapters you learn quite a bit. However, there are books on just Istio, right? So there aren't a ton out there, and I'm not going to recommend or not talk about other ones. There's been some decent ones written. It changes a lot, and of course with ambient mesh coming as a stronger push, it kind of changes a lot of the philosophy. Still same functionality, it's just the chapter on installing gets to be a lot different. But yeah, I think you'd find those 2 chapters interesting. I don't know, Mark, yourself.
Yeah, I love those. Those were really fun chapters to do because especially the second one was the first time I really got to stretch my application developer wings and be like, okay, this is how we build an API. We got out of the infrastructure and really dove into the application layer and how it interacts with Istio. So it is 1:00 East Coast time, US East Coast time. So I think we got past about 15 minutes.
We did.
Everybody who came, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put you on the spot, Scott. Do you think next week we'll be able to do chapter 2 and dive into kind? Is that going to work for you?
Yeah, it should be good. Yeah, I don't see any reason why not. Same time, same
hopefully, hopefully you're no longer patient 0 from the House of Mouse.
Yeah, hopefully not. I was in Disney last week for everybody, so it's a lot of germs in Disney, right? It's just going to happen.
So yeah, so we're going to wrap it up. Thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks to everybody.